Hi everyone, welcome to our 30-day learning Oracle Goldengate Classic Architecture training. Today is day one. My name is Ashish Agarwal, and I'll be delivering this lecture to you. So before commencing the session, just a quick round of update regarding my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Ashish Agarwal _GG. So if you haven't visited the channel, I would request you to do visit the channel and do like, share, and subscribe the channel. The channel is dedicated to Oracle Goldengate related videos. Thank you. So first of all, before we proceed, let us discuss about Oracle database architecture. Now, Golden Gate is a product which works on database, right? Now, what is Golden Gate? So Golden Gate is a CDC tool. CDC stands for Change Data Capture Tool, right? So Golden Gate is a CDC tool, Change Data Capture Tool. So what does it mean is it captures the changes from the source database, and then whatever change data has been captured, it applies it to target database. Okay, so Golden Gate does the replication from source to target database. Now, for Golden Gate, the source has to be a database, right? So the best part with Golden Gate is Golden Gate was developed in 1995 and it was a standalone company at that time. It wasn't Oracle. In 2009, Oracle overtook it, and since then it is known as Oracle Goldengate. Now the thing is, Goldengate was a product which was developed or whose concept was there basically prior to Oracle overtook it. So initially, the best part with Goldengate is when Goldengate was developed initially, it was developed not only keeping Oracle in mind, but keeping all the databases. So initially, when it was developed for tandem databases. So which are used for ATM networks. But later on, it wasn't basically developed for Oracle. In 2009, Oracle overtook it and it made it marketable. And of course, it made some changes in the technology as well. So the best part with Golden Gate is the way it works for Oracle, in the same way it works for SQL Server. In the same way it works for MySQL. In the same way it works for Postgres database as well. So any database, so I have named few, but whatever database is supported by the Golden Gate, it works in the same way. Okay. Now, for each database, now the question is from where Golden Gate is able to capture the data. Does Golden Gate reads the tables directly, or how does it able to capture the data? So the answer to the question is each database has a transaction logs. Each database has transactional logs from where Golden Gate reads the data. So Golden Gate is a change data capture tool. So each database, when we talk about Oracle, these transaction logs are called as, can anyone tell me what these transaction logs are called as in Oracle
Read,
database?
read logs.
Redo logs, or backup of redo logs are taken on disk, which are called as archive logs. So in Oracle, these transactional logs are called as redo logs or archive logs. In SQL Server, MySQL, they are called as transaction logs. So basically what happens is whatever changes are happening in the database, this concept is there with each database that the transactional data, whatever transactional changes are being made to the database, all changes gets returned to the transactional logs of the data. So these transactional logs in case of Oracle are called as redo logs, or once the backup of redo logs is taken on disk, they are called as archive logs. Okay, so it is very important for us to understand how Golden Gate works. So let us discuss about Oracle database architecture to understand it. So if I have to consider Oracle database, so Oracle database is divided into two parts. First is instance, which again in turn is divided into two parts, memory components and background processes, right? So Oracle database is divided into two parts, instance and Oracle database files. Again, the instance is divided into two parts, which is memory components and background processes. Right? Now, Oracle database files are the files. Basically, Oracle database contains the files which are data files. Data files are the files which are actual files which contains the actual data. So say for example, when you do select star from employee table. So from where do you get that information from? You get that information from the data stored in the data files. Then you have control files. Control files are the files which contains the metadata information. They are the most critical files in Oracle database. If you lose them, you lose the data in the database. So control files are the most important files at the database level. Then you have redo log files. So redo log file contains the change data. So whatever changes are happening in the database, those changes gets returned into the redo logs. Now these redo logs are in limit, right? They are in limit. So say for example, you have defined 150 MB of redo. So three redos, you have defined a 50 MB. So subsequently they will get filled, right? So what happens is you take the backup of these redo log files on disk on your operating system. So the backup of redo log files when taken on the operating system, your OS level, they are called as archive log files. So archive log files are nothing but backup of your redo log files. So archive log file contains the changes, whatever is being made to the database. So remember one thing, your redo log files or subsequently archive log files contains committed as well as uncommitted data. They contain both DDL as well as DML transaction. Okay. So any change which is being made to the database gets written into the transaction logs. In case of Oracle, these transaction logs are called as redo logs or backup of redo logs, which are called as archive logs. Okay. Now, how do these redo logs or archive logs get the data from? So the thing is, when we talk about any change data capture tool, including Goldengate or any of its competitor as well, so redo log files or the archive log files, the transaction logs basically are the source from where they fetch the data from or read the data from. So I again repeat, for Goldengate, these redo log files or backup of redo log files, which are called as archive log files, they serve as the source. So Goldengate processes reads the data from these transaction logs, captures the changes, and then those gets applied on the target database. Okay. Now the question comes, how do your redo log file get the data from? And of course, subsequently the data goes into archive log. So how do they get the data from? So the thing is, this is internal concept, and guys, right now I'm only going to discuss about redo log files or archive log files, what is related to Goldengate. This Oracle database architecture itself is so wide. If we decide to discuss on this, it might take us 4 or 5 sessions. So I'm going to discuss only what is related to Oracle Goldengate, these redo log files or archive log files. Now the question comes, how do these redo log files or archive log files get the data from? So the thing is, your instance has different memory components: library cache, data dictionary cache, right? So these are the memory components: library cache, data dictionary cache, database buffer cache, Java pool, redo log buffer, large pool, and there are other memory components. Along with it, there are background processes as well. Different background processes are pmon, smon, database writer, which is called as dbwr. Then you have log writer, which is called as lgwr. Then you have checkpoint. So this is database checkpoint we are talking about, because we are talking about database architecture. So this is database checkpoint. Okay. And then you have other background processes as well. So how do these redo log files get the data from is they get the data from your redo log buffer with help of log writer. Now the question comes, how does this redo log buffer get the data from? Let me give you an overview. So the thing is, at the database level, say for example, at your SQL server or your Toad or SQL prompt, you ran one command, which is update dpt set location equal to Boston, where department number is equal to 10. Now what will happen is, this is a change which is made to the database. Now this particular buffer gets returned into the database buffer cache first. Okay. So the thing is, don't think that once you make the changes, so we have to understand, guys, one thing, internally how database works. So just like your car, when you turn on your car ignition, so you see that your car is getting started, right? Your ignition is getting turned on. But internally, there are a lot of things which happens, right? And then your car ignition turns on, right? Same thing applies to database as well. You see that your when you like update the data or select the data, for you it looks like it's happening internally. There is nothing which is happening, but internally there are a lot of things which happens. After that you get that information, or if after that you get the any transaction getting applied. So the thing is, you update any record, for example, so that buffer internally gets dirty. So that buffer is called as dirty buffer. So when you select, what happens is that select statement goes to database buffer cache, but it's not dirty. Any change data which is there in buffer, if there is any changed data, then the buffer is called as dirty. So dirty buffer refers to changed buffer with the changed data. So say for example, you update the record. So what happens is data from data files will go to database buffer cache. Once the data is there in database buffer cache, once it is dirty, the copy of the dirty buffer gets returned into the redo log buffer. The copy of the dirty buffer gets logged into the redo log buffer. Now, data from redo log buffer gets returned to the redo log file with help of this log writer process. So log writer process writes the dirty buffer from redo log buffer to redo log file. Now your log writer process writes the data from redo log buffer to redo log file under these conditions. Whenever there is commit, the data from redo log buffer to redo log file will be returned. Or when your redo log buffer is 1/3 full, or when there is 1 MB of redo in this redo log buffer, or every 3 seconds, the data from redo log buffer gets returned to redo log file, or before database writer process writes the data from database buffer cache to data file. So under these conditions, your log writer process writes the data from redo log buffer to redo log file. Okay. Now the question comes again, if the data directly has to be returned from database buffer cache to data files with help of database writer process. So guys, once you update the record, so the change data gets written here. However, the data which has been changed directly gets returned from database buffer cache to data file with help of this database writer process. Now the question comes, what is the need of this redo log file then? If the data is directly getting returned into the data file, then why can't database writer regularly read the data from database buffer cache to data file? What is the purpose of this redo log file? So guys, the purpose of these redo log files is to redo the data. I'll give you one example, very good example. Okay. Now, suppose today in your account you have $10,000. Okay, $10,000 or 10,000 Indian rupee you have in your. Okay. Now you decided to deposit $5,000 more into your account. Okay. So you went to the bank, you went to the cashier over there, you handed over your $5,000 and ask her to deposit into your account. Okay. Now, the cashier is accessing the front end. Okay. So from front end, he or she will mention that this account number has to be credited with $5,000 or rupees. Right. So the updated balance should be 15,000. So at the front end, they made the change. At the front end, the change is made. You are given the receipt and you went home considering that the amount is will be reflected in your account. But what happened was at the front end, the request was sent. However, before it could be applied onto the target database, before that particular transaction could be applied on the target database, the database crashed due to some reason. It could be power failure. It could be any other reason. Right. So what happens now is you come home, you found out still it's $10,000 in your account, and you are flabbergasted to know this because it should be 15,000 and you are losing 5,000 currency. Right. So what happens in this scenario? If you lose this money, bank will lose its credibility, it will lose its customer, it will lose its goodwill. Right. Along with that, it's also the database issue. Now the thing is, what happens is now your redo part comes into picture. So the thing was, the front end request was sent, the dirty buffer was already made, the data from redo log buffer to redo log file was already done. But before, because when you see the actual data, you see the actual data from the data file. However, what happened was before the database writer process could write the data from database buffer cache to the data file, your server was crashed. Right? Your server got crashed. So now how can you then apply those transactions which were missed? So for that purpose, you already have those redo or archives, right? So what happens is when the power failure due to which your server went down, when your server comes up after the issue, what happens is before the database could be restarted, recovery is made from the available redos or archives. So once that recovery will be made, during that time, your updated balance in your account would be shown as $15,000. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of this redo. So redo are used by all the change data capture tool. Not only Goldengate, any Goldengate competitor like SharePlex, Attunity, or any other product when we talk about. Each product, any change data capture uses your redos, your basically the transaction logs to apply those changes which were missed. So Golden Gate uses these redo log files or archives for capturing the change data because your redos contains only the change data. Whatever changes are happening to the database in any of the objects, those changes gets written into the redo log file. And again, I repeat, I have listened to people saying that redo log files or archives contains only committed transactions. Guys, that's not true. That is a misconception among, or I can say misunderstanding as well, that these redo log files or your transaction logs contains only committed transactions. That's not true. Your transaction logs contains committed as well as uncommitted transactions. Okay, so for Golden Gate, your redo log files or backup of redo log files, which are called as archive log files, they access source. So Golden Gate or any change data capture tool, they capture the changes from these files, and once these changes are captured, they action accordingly. So the thing is, for Golden Gate or any change data capture tool to work, first of all, you have to ensure that the changes are getting logged into the transaction logs. Remember, if the change is not getting logged into the transaction log, then Golden Gate or any change data capture tool won't be able to capture. The reason being, the source of any source of Golden Gate for any database is the transaction log. Okay. So for Golden Gate to capture the data should be first of all logged into these redo log files, which subsequently would be logged into your archive log. Okay. So this is about Oracle database. Now, when we talk about any other database, each database has its own transaction logs. So when we talk about SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, or any other database, each database has its own transaction logs. In case of Oracle, these transaction logs are called as redo logs or backup of redo logs, which are called as archive log